We're on? Yes, we're on. I was excited to see that whole description of OK 2030. But there's a part of me that cringes when I hear the word fix. We need to fix things. Because I sometimes think that fixing things is a waste of time. The real challenge is to revision them, to figure out what they really should be as we go forward, because sometimes you're fixing what was instead of reinventing what should be. And when you revision things, they actually come out quite different. I listen every morning to the news, and there's another conflict or potential conflict somewhere in the world, and it's kind of discouraging. So I sort of revision conflict, and I get into my Zen mode, and I think, well, before you have a conflict with someone, first walk a mile in their shoes. Then when you have the conflict, you'll be a mile away, and you'll have their shoes. So win-win kind of conclusions are my favorite ones, and I always try to work towards those. I've been doing futures research for 5 decades now, and it's always interesting, you know, some of the same old issues keep rearing their heads over and over again. Began in the insurance industry with the concern about the nationalization of health insurance, and it's how many years later, and I've been through that discussion 5 times in my history. So we're still there. And it's interesting that over the past decade or so, there's been a new question that's come up to me from a lot of people. Not so much always what is the future going to be, but how have we been getting it right for so long? So before I go into a very quick trip into the future, what I want to do first is prepare your heads for that trip. Because I compare an understanding of the future to all those people out there who say, if I could just win the lottery, I'd have it made for life. Well, if you know the statistics, you know that over half the people who've won the lottery a few years later are bankrupt. And that's because it has nothing to do with having the money, but everything to do with having your head screwed on right about money. And the future is the same thing. I could get up here and tell you a whole lot of the things that we're seeing coming down the pike, but if you don't have your head screwed on right, what's the point? So first we're going to start screwing your head on right. And one of the reasons that we've been getting our understanding of the future so right for so long is because we are humble enough to recognize something called educated incapacity. It's one of what we call our thinking technologies, the recognition of educated incapacity. Educated incapacity is knowing so much about what you already know that you're the last to be able to see the future for it differently. And that's why we wouldn't go to bankers to find out about the future of banking. We wouldn't go to retailers to find out about the future of retailing. We wouldn't go to doctors to find out about the future of medicine. Not to denigrate any profession, any industry, any business, we all suffer from this. Not one of us is immune to having educated incapacity. There are only 2 thinking creatures that I know of that don't suffer from it, and those are children and aliens from another planet. So frequently I see our job as being able to help our audiences and our clients see through the eyes of an alien. There was a wonderful cartoon done many years ago. The Canadian Film Board sponsored it, and it showed 2 aliens who were sent down to the Earth to observe us for 2 weeks, write up their report, and send it back to their native planet. So they did. They observed us very carefully. And their report said that the Earth is made up of 4-wheeled vehicles called automobiles, and each one owns at least one 2-legged slave called a human being. In the morning, a loud noise goes off to wake up the human to get itself prepared to take the automobile to a social club, where the automobile hangs out all day with other automobiles while the human being goes into a building to support to earn an income to support the automobile. And it goes on in that fashion, and of course, I chuckled, as you did, but a light bulb went off, and I said, isn't that the truth? If you could see something new for the first time, what would that look like to you? How would it present itself to you? And then what would you do about it? If you're going to think about revisioning Oklahoma for 2030, how would you step back and see this through the eyes of an alien without educated incapacity, without trying to perhaps fix things that were, but to create things that will be, to have that potential, to have that vision? I will tell you that the things you see today, forgetting about the future, aren't the things that are there. We don't even see currently what is true, let alone what will be true 10 years from now, and I'll prove that to you. I'll prove it to you. I'm going to test the skills of an alien's observation against yours. I'm going to ask you to picture in your mind's eye all of those who make up your viable marketplace, your constituency, your workforce. Picture them in your mind's eye. For the most part, you're picturing people who are similar to those sitting around the table here today. An alien coming down from another planet would know that about 20 years ago, Italy became the first country in world history to have more people over the age of 60 than under the age of 20, followed shortly thereafter by Germany, Greece, Belgium, Turkey, all of Eastern Europe. Japan is now the oldest nation on earth. China has the 4 grandparents, 2 parents, 1 child. The United States is aging significantly. Many of the states within the United States are aging significantly. Oklahoma will have an increasingly aged population. There are a few countries in the industrial world that have youth representation in their demography to counteract that. Luckily, the United States is one, and we have immigration to thank for that. If it weren't for immigration, we'd be in the same demographic problem situation as Japan, just as old with no young to support that. So we're kind of lucky. There are a few other countries in that club. We have France that entered it a few years ago, and that's because the majority of births now in France are Muslim, as they are in the Netherlands. There are some other countries like Iceland and New Zealand because there's nothing else to do there. But basically, the industrial world is aging significantly. And we are, even though we have a youth population. There are counterbalances in the world: India, the Arab Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa. Those are all increasingly young. So what do we do about that here? When we picture our vital workforce, when we picture our vital stakeholder group, are we picturing people over the age of 65, 70, 75? They haven't historically come into our frame of reference, but that is one of the most vital parts of the population here in this country, and certainly here in this state. And we know nothing about them because we never study them. Because all of our market studies end with lots of segmentation up to the age of 65, and then we say 65 and over. We know that 1 in 9 baby boomers are projected to live to be 100 years old. 1 in 9. That means we're going to be faced with millions of people up there in the 80s and 90s. But the interesting thing is that while we are extending life, we're not extending it at the end of life. We're extending it in the middle of life. From 35 to 70, 75, we're not aging. We've basically said, not happening to me. You may lose a little hair, marketplace will fix that. You may lose a little sex function, a couple of pills out there that can fix that. Elastic will take care of the rest. Basically 35 to 70, 75, not aging, not happening. In the history of the human race, that has never been part of our life cycle. A 30, 35-year span where, as far as we're concerned, we're not getting any older. That opens up markets and possibilities and challenges, opportunities that we have never seen before on the face of this planet, and certainly won't see if we keep lumping 65 and over as one group altogether. And when I asked you to picture those who made up your vibrant workforces and marketplace constituencies, you probably weren't picturing people under the age of 18, were you? Well, the fact of the matter is that it's those young people that are creating all of the systems, the technologies, the alternative media, the pressure points that are running your systems today, your businesses, informing your markets. Those kids are creating the future, forcing the competition, creating the upheaval. How many of you have advisory boards of young people between the ages of 14 and 18? Probably none of you, unless you're in a children's business. But even if you are, if you were Toys R Us, and if you assumed your market were children, and I said to you, rethink that, who would be the exact opposite of children? The answer would be seniors, old people. Well, who is the market for Toys R Us? Who's spending all the money on the stuff for their grandkids? If we don't look there, we don't see there, and we get trapped in our educated incapacity. And I'll bet when I asked you to picture all of those who made up your vibrant workforce and your marketplace, your stakeholders, your constituencies, you pictured people. An alien from another planet would know that for many of you in this room today, and for much of Oklahoma for 2030, over 90% of the workforce is non-carbon life forms. Information systems, technologies, platforms, that without which you would have to hire thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people to do the work that they do. So here's an interesting question. If 90% of the workforce at this point is made up of non-carbon life forms, already, this is not the future, this is today, who hires those non-carbon life forms? We have things called human resources, HR. They don't hire the non-carbon life forms, IT does. And maybe that's why, in many cases, we don't get to be the visionaries we should be, because we keep separating out the productive assets in our businesses and in our economies. Human, non-carbon life forms, completely different hiring facilities, training facilities, decision-making, when in fact we are already, forget about the future, living and working side by side. And in many cases, confronting and conflicting with each other instead of figuring out how to work best in those conditions. I will also make you another bet when I asked you to picture all of those who made up your workforce and made up your marketplace, made up your constituencies. You pictured people, and you pretty much pictured fit people, not physically challenged, but fit. And if I asked you about all the people who are in this luncheon today, you would kind of mentally aggregate them in your mind as being all physically fit, because you can look around and see them. An alien from another planet would add up all the women who've ever been pregnant, all of those with carpal tunnel syndrome, tennis elbow, runner's knee, migraine headaches, back problems, obesity, anorexia, dyspepsia, asthma, heart conditions. I could go on and on and on. And the alien would conclude that the human species is 100% physically challenged. 100%. We don't figure that into any of our discussions about healthcare or retail needs, banking design. We know that when you design for the physically challenged, you design universally. That's always been a design concept. Those of us women in the audience know this very well, because we travel a lot. We have luggage. We're in airports. We need to go to the ladies' room. And if you want to get into one of those stalls in the ladies' room with your luggage, you know you have to be a fool not to use the handicap stall. Because to get into one of the others is a real challenge with luggage. And if you do get in, you ain't ever getting out again. We know that. We know that if you buy a piece of electronics today, and if the remote fails, you need these, a magnifying glass, and a flashlight to find out just how to turn that thing on and off. We know that we go into beautiful romantic restaurants and we order what the waiter cited as the special because it's too dark to read the menu. And we know that there are hotels that are designed such that the bathrooms are so elegantly beautiful, you could eat a romantic dinner in there, but you can't get your makeup on. We know all of this, but we don't pay attention to it because we just figure everybody is superhuman, super capable, and able to do anything. But when we start designing differently, all of a sudden sales numbers go up. Even things like larger print. Washing machines knew that in the 1950s when they decided, Whirlpool did, they decided to just run some extra special run for people who had difficulty seeing. And they made the knobs much bigger and larger. And they sold out immediately, not to people who were theoretically blind or semi-blind, but to the general population who does not tend to keep their washing machines in the middle of their well-lit living rooms, but somewhere in the house where it's a lot easier to see bigger numbers and bigger dials. But we don't take those things into consideration because our educated incapacity tells us that things were always designed a certain way and we should continue to design them a certain way. Let's take something outside of democracy. If I asked you to picture in your mind's eye currency, what would you be picturing? Currency. A lot of you would be seeing money, government issued money, maybe credit cards, plastic. Some of you, bright, hey, I've heard of Bitcoin. I know that that's a new currency. Bitcoin is a currency. It's actually a class of virtual currency that's called cryptocurrency. There are more cryptocurrencies coming online. Bitcoin will not be the last and possibly not the biggest. But if I asked you about 10 years ago, what did the Economist pinpoint as the second largest currency in global circulation on an everyday basis behind the US dollar, would you know what it was? It's right in front of you. It's right in front of all of you. Your educated incapacity is stopping you from seeing it. The second largest currency in circulation globally on a daily dollar volume basis behind the US dollar. Reward points. Reward points. They are liquid in the global markets. You can use them to buy anything. You can get them when you buy anything. But we haven't really thought about that from a financial perspective, and I'm just waiting for the banks that come along to really organize my reward points in some way. And then the currency that China is most concerned about is virtual currency, not so much Bitcoin, but virtual currency. That currency which is generated by and used in virtual worlds, massive multiplayer games online. There are so many people involved in those endeavors in China that virtual currency is spilling over to rival real currency in the economy. You can buy real goods with virtual currency. You can buy virtual goods with real currency. On the global markets, these things are now interchangeable. Interchangeable. And how about tweets? Did you picture them when I asked you about currency? When the fact is that so many more companies are giving products and services to those who tweet about them, making tweets a currency. When we think about people who are under the age of 25 and certainly under the age of 18, we have to understand that that's a population that if you ask them about Fort Knox, they'd probably think that it was a fortress somewhere to protect somebody from oncoming battleships. They don't understand that there was ever anything that was backed by anything. Currency is all funny money today. Young people live in a world of debt and leverage, and they get out of school with amazing amounts of debt that they don't know when they're going to pay back. And it all becomes monopoly money. That's not the world that many of you were raised in, but that is the world of today. And if we were going to vision ahead to 2030, how do we take that into account? What do we do with that? What do we do with this new world that young people are inhabiting? What if I asked you about nutrition? If I asked you to picture nutrition, what would you be focusing on? What would you see in your mind's eye? Food? Well, you know as well as I know that a lot of the food out there today is not nutritious. Why would you be picturing food? It turns out that the most significant source of nutrition is actually the sun. And the only reason we eat food is it's because the way we can convert the various colors of the sun, the spectra of the sun, each of which delivers in nanometers energy to us that we convert to use in order to live. And that's why you hear a lot of people say, eat the rainbow. Because the more colors of food you eat, the more of that spectra you are consuming and converting into different forms of energy that you need. And many people around the world that are malnourished, are actually malluminated, not malfed. They eat lots of stuff, food, but not nutrition. So if we were going to think about how to fix healthcare, how to educate, how to take care of a population that's aging as we head toward 2030, should we not be focusing on nutrition as opposed to food? And what does that do then to our mental models? Where does that take us? Where do we go with that? And if I asked you to picture sources of energy in your mind's eye, and Oklahoma is an energy state. If I asked you to picture sources of energy in your mind's eye, what would you be picturing? Fossil fuels? Wind? Solar? Geothermal? Hydro? An alien from another planet with no educated incapacity would already know that there is nothing in the universe that is not energy. Everything at its basic foundation, at its quantum level, its subatomic level, is energy. There is no solid matter anywhere in the universe. It's all energy. And there's no reason why your heartbeat can't be powering your cell phone. And there's no reason why the lobby floor of this hotel could not be laid with tiles such that when people like today, this many people walk through it, that wouldn't provide the energy to light this room. An alien would know that. And when we think about Oklahoma 2030, should we be focusing on that? It's not about fixing. It's about visioning, and not even just the future, but what is already here and known that we can take into 2030. Here's the last one I'm going to ask you as a test. I'm going to ask you to picture in your mind's eye sports. What are you picturing when you picture sports in your mind's eye? Athletes competing with each other with brawn, speed, power. How many of you have heard of esports? Can I see a raise of hands? Esports. Okay, really interesting. Maybe 3 hands in the whole audience. What we have already started less than a decade ago, and what is already ramming onto the scene, is esports, electronic sports. 2 years ago, tens of thousands of people filed into a stadium in Northern California to watch something that 35 million around the world saw live streaming. It was the League of Champions, online computer gaming competition. Athletes are now the grown-up kids that you told, get off of that and pay attention to everything else. And now colleges are giving scholarships to athletes to compete in their esports leagues, and there are million-dollar prizes being offered. Tens of millions of people around the world are watching esports. Casinos, from Las Vegas to everywhere, are converting many of their spaces into arenas for esports. And esports is projected to be the biggest growth in sports in the coming years, and it already is. So when you think about the arenas, and when you think about sports, and you think about athletes and athletics, as you head over the next 10, 13 years, if you don't have esports on your radar, you're not seeing what is going on now, because of your educated incapacity. Forget 13 years from now. This is already happening. I could go on forever about what you're currently missing, but I do want to take you on a journey to put everything into context. So I'm just going to sum up this piece of our time together by saying this. We all, every one of us, suffers from educated incapacity. If we're going to do visioning, we can't let that get in the way. We have to be able to see what is and think beyond what we have known and go to where things are and will be. And I'm going to give you a couple of very quick hints how you might personally help yourselves get over educated incapacity, because you're never going to get over it completely. I've been doing this work for 50 years. I'm more objective than the average bear, but I'm still nowhere there. So here are a couple of tips. Number one, subscribe to 2 publications that in your wildest dreams you would never, ever have an interest in reading. If you happen to like yachting, subscribe to Bowling Weekly. If you happen to like home decorating, subscribe to the World Wrestling Federation. And actually subscribe to them and read them. Don't just read them online. Don't just pick them up at airports. Get physical copy of the subscription and read the publication whenever it comes out. This will help in your neuroplasticity. It will help your brain to grow new connections as you are introduced to environments, publics, stakeholders that are not a part of anything you currently know or understand. And add a 3rd publication on the political side. If you tend to be on the right, subscribe to a liberal publication. If you tend to be on the left, subscribe to a conservative publication. Not a screed, a thoughtful one. But this too will help with your neuroplasticity. It will help open thinking channels that have been closed off to you for a very long time. The second tip that I would give you is to hire interns and use them wisely. Don't use them to Xerox anything or to get coffee. Use them for their alien eyes. Have them shadow you. Debrief them constantly with serious and honest questions, letting them know you want serious and honest answers. Like, what did I do today that you didn't understand? What did I do today that you disagree with? What, if you were in my business, would you have done differently than what I did today? I've done that with many of my clients, and it's interesting what happens. I had one banking company that had their entire website redesigned by a young intern who basically said, "Are you serious? Can I tell you what's wrong?" And they said, "Yes." And he said, "Your website sucks." And they said, "What do you mean? We just had it done last year. It's so pretty. It's so lovely." And he said, "How much money did you spend building your headquarters building? Compare that to what you spent on building your website and understand that that's where you're going to get all your new customers from, not the building, the website. Now, what do you want to do about it?" And so they hired him and a couple of his friends, and they completely reconceptualized their entire website. And within 2 years, that started to account for more than 50% of the new deposits in the bank. So use your interns wisely, not stupidly, and let them tell you frankly why they think you're not doing what you possibly could be or should be doing. Gather your staff around at least twice a year and have them sit down and figure out assumptions that you are making that, if you took the opposite assumption, would lead you down a different path, just like I did with the Toys R Us one. If I switched out this assumption for its exact opposite, and I believed that that was the way the world works, where would that take us? And you'd be surprised at the new business opportunities that suddenly start flowing from just that exercise, just that. If you say, "We need to hire graduates in engineering and pay them X and compete with everybody else, that's what we need to do." Well, what if the opposite were true? What if you actually could do better if you looked at completely different new hires, such like graduates of music school? Well, the interesting thing about music majors is that music and math often track together. People who major in music tend to be able to figure out different languages, just as math is a different language, music is a different language, so that they can kind of adapt themselves to coding sorts of languages and situations. They're grateful to find any job upon graduation, and give them 2 nights off clear so they can play in their jazz band, and you have a highly motivated employee. But we don't think in those terms because of our educated incapacity. So just sit down twice a year with your people and say, "Give me an assumption that's a core assumption of ours, and let's take the exact opposite and see where it takes us." And you're going to get some really interesting thinking, really interesting thinking. The fourth tip I would give you is to stay current with the music. It turns out that everyone, once they reach the age of 21, believes that all the newer music stinks. And that's universal. Doesn't matter how old you are. Once you turn 21, all the good music happened up to then, and everything after that was crap. Some of you have young kids, and you are condemned to stay current with the music. But for those of you who don't, you have to actually make an effort to do it. But again, music lays down patterns in your brain. And those patterns of harmonies and melodies actually begin to harden. And you need them to soften up. And you need that neuroplasticity in order to hear new things. And when you stay current with the music, you actually open yourself to hearing new things. And when I stay current with the music, I'm not saying the latest country western songs for this year. I'm saying the edgy stuff that you don't like, don't want to hear. Listen to it on occasion. And when you listen to it more than 5 times or 10 times, it's not as awful and frightening, but it does increase your neuroplasticity. And the last tip that I'm going to give you is this. When I ask you to think in your mind's eye of a mentor, who are you picturing? Probably someone who's older, wiser, more experienced than you. But here again, I'm going to flip that. You should all go out and find yourselves and hire yourselves, just as you would a babysitter or someone to mow your lawn, a 15-year-old mentor that you pay 3 hours a week to teach you anything he or she wants to teach you. anything. And don't make it somebody in your family because they have no patience for you. But go and find a 15-year-old, not a 17 or 18-year-old because they're already in college, they've got their own patterns, but a 15-year-old to just take you on their journey. It will be worth it to you. You will learn amazing things that you will bring into your personal and professional lives and will even help inform Oklahoma 2030. So that said, we're living in an age of what we call templosion. Templosion is the implosion of time, even around the biggest things. Today, in a couple of days, weeks, maybe a month, we can do through genetic engineering what it would have taken nature tens of thousands of years to do, hundreds of thousands of years to do. Today, we can, on a rainy Saturday afternoon, in 5 hours, experience two worlds back to back. We can watch Jurassic Park, take that movie out, and put in Star Trek, and within a few hours, have experienced all those many years ago and all those many years into the future. And our forebears never had the opportunity to picture either one of those worlds. Not those many years ago, not those many years in the future. We can do that now in a very short period of time. In fact, the greatest social underpinning of a threat that we have that is affecting everything from restaurant design to political systems is that we can do all these big things in a very short period of time, because the counter-trend to that, what it leads to, what it causes, is actually boredom. Okay, now I've done that, what's next? The more you can squeeze into smaller and smaller periods of time, the more bored we become. But we also become immortal, because we can define immortality as living 500 years, 10,000 years, whatever immortality means to you, or the way an alien would define it, which is experiencing all those years in whatever time we live. And if you can experience walking, and with virtual reality immersion technology you will, walking and playing with the dinosaurs, and a few minutes later commanding the Starship Enterprise, you are immortal, and you are bored. And these become wholly new parts of the human condition, and they create new challenges to all of our systems as well as new business opportunities. So, in this age of templosion, what we are seeing is a speeding up of the evolution of economies. So let me explain that very briefly. You have been told since 2007-8 that we have been in a recession. Well, isn't it interesting that we still haven't kind of come out of that recession? Well, yeah, businesses have come out of the recession, but no, jobs haven't come out of the recession. So actually, yeah, maybe it's a recovery, but it's a jobless recovery. Maybe there's another dip. Educated incapacity has us talking about recession when that's not the issue. Never was the issue. In 1992, we told our clients, and a few years later, we actually wrote a book saying that in the year 2005 to 2007, we were going to see massive global upheavals, economic, and we were going to see massive layoffs, and jobs were going to be the critical issue in this country and in many others around the world. We said that in 1992, not because we have a crystal ball, not because we can read entrails, but because we look at long-term trends. And the fact of the matter is that we were looking at another global, fundamental economic transformation, following one that we were just coming through. We have been through these before. We went from the hunter-gatherer to the agricultural, from the agricultural to the industrial, from the industrial to the post-industrial, from the post-industrial to what we called in 1992 the immotile, and then said that we would be facing again in 2005 to 7, and we would have to wait to name it because we'd have to see what the two things are that determine an economy. Where is disposable income going? Where are jobs being created? All of these transformations are caused by disruptive technologies that come together, and in coming together create efficiencies. And what do efficiencies mean? We don't need those people doing those jobs anymore. So we wind up throwing a lot of people out of work, but building whole new industries and businesses that go on to employ people in jobs, in careers, in ways that never existed before in history. And that is the nature of economic transformations. We were thousands of years in the agricultural. We were 200 in the industrial. We were 45 years in the post-industrial. In '92, it was clear that we were now, again, throwing out of work so many people that were in the jobs of the future. AT&T, Nippon Telephone and Telegraph, Xerox, layoffs, IBM. So we knew that it was again happening, and we saw, because of Templosion, that we would be lucky to get 12 to 13 years out of that one before we saw the beginnings of another, and we would see huge layoffs. And that's exactly what happened. Not a recession, not caused by the economic collapse, but a financial systems collapse because of very risky mortgage-backed instruments. But that's not what the underlying issue was. It was this economic transformation that could have been predicted anyway. So each time we go through these, something else happens. Everything from the prior economy becomes commoditized. You can't make as much money on it. The prices go down. So you have to move up to the new value propositions to see how you make money. I'm going to start speaking very, very quickly here because I know that we're pressed for time and I have yet so much to tell you. But the new value propositions are ones that we haven't seen before. The old ones kind of go away. Some of you remember in the 70s, the first handheld calculators that were introduced, Texas Instruments, they were $1,500. Now you get more computing capacity in a singing birthday card. Some of you may remember the first portable telephones. They weighed a ton in big briefcases with giant batteries, and they were very expensive. And today, these mobiles are given away free. It's not about them, it's about the value propositions. As we look into this economy that's arising, we see 10 new value propositions. I'm going to race through them very quickly, but don't worry about remembering them. You can go to my website, which is thefuturehunters.com. They're all there. Just look at the metaspace economy, the 10 value propositions. They're there. So I'm just going to race through them very quickly with you right now. They're all about the altered dimensionality of some aspect of space. Inner space, outer space, cyberspace, microspace, time space, design space, green to blue space, storage space, play space, and interspace. So let's take them, give them 1 minute each before we part. First, inner space. What makes living things tick? Humans, the planet, animals, whatever. We are increasingly understanding that, and that's becoming a value proposition. I just want to do you one favor here to say that in understanding that no two humans have the same brain, one of the things that we understand, for example, is that there are people who have very happy brains, and even under the worst of circumstances, their brains are kicking out the positive neurotransmitters, the dopamines and endorphins that make them feel good. And there are people with very stingy brains, and even under the best of circumstances, their brains are not kicking out those positive neurotransmitters. As people who manage organizations, all of you, I would tell you this. Your 3 most important challenges in managing people do not include making them happy. Those 3 most important challenges are making sure that everyone is treated with respect, that everyone is treated equitably, and that all barriers are removed to people being able to do the jobs to the best of their ability. That's it. Their happiness is their own issue. There are some very happy people who get no work done, hang out at the water cooler all day, and there are some miserable SOBs who are highly productive. So happiness is not the issue, and if you really feel you need happy people, do what Disney does, do what Southwest does, hire happy people. That will save you a lot of time and aggravation. But we know that the brain is doing amazing things, and marketing messages, communication, product design, the understanding of what makes us tick is going to be a huge value proposition in the coming years. Outer space is increasingly being privatized. We are going to be on the moon privately and mining asteroids privately within the next year. There's no question about that. And we're looking at even more people being able to visit space as tourists. We're looking at citizen science being able to map space, understanding more things as we move out into space, outer space, huge value proposition, not even thinking about the issue of drones, as well as satellites running everything on Earth. It's all run up there. And in fact, if you're concerned about nuclear weapons from North Korea, the far bigger concern that they would land anything on land is that they would explode anything up there, which would knock out systems everywhere. And then we have microspace, which is nanotechnology, nano meaning billionths of, at the molecular level. And so much happening there. Many of you have heard of 3D printing. Be also aware of 4D printing, which is when you can print anything and over time it will become something else. Because maybe you've printed something like this, you've added water, sent it up to space, and it expands to become a space station. Or you've printed it and folded it in origami fashion, sent it out to a military arena, it unfolds and becomes a hospital. We're going to have serious questions, for example, about shipping, because shipping is based on size and weight. As we 3D and 4D print, and can do that anywhere, how are we going to subsidize shipping in the future? How are we going to deal with security when anything I carry in my pocket or my bag can at a later point become something else that it isn't now? These are really interesting questions. But ultimately, when we think about what we call bang fuel, BAANGFUEL, bits, atoms, antimatter, neurons, genes, frequencies and vibrations, and ultra and infraspectral energy and light, we are looking at the combinations and recombinations of things that are going to change material science, energy, life forms. We've already printed proteins, healthcare, everything, all up for change in the next couple of years. And then we think about cyberspace, and we're only at the tip of that, only at the tip. I hear a lot of people ask me about the future of education, and I was speaking to Joy about this a little bit earlier, your superintendent. And I was saying basically, okay, education. Why would anybody want the most brilliant and entertaining teacher, biology teacher in the world, going on the internet and teaching millions of people biology, not just a classroom, but millions, when through virtual reality immersion technology, you can become a white blood corpuscle, swim through the bloodstream, fight off all kinds of invading viruses and bacteria, and learn more about immunology having fun in 10 minutes than any teacher can teach you in 20 hours. Why would you want somebody to teach you archaeology when you can live in ancient civilizations? A couple of days here, a couple of days there. You may need a guide to ask you why the pottery was different in village 1 from village 2, and that may be because one was tropical and the other one was desert. Guides will be important for the future. We are moving out of the world of education into the world of learning. That changes the whole paradigm. And when we envision Oklahoma 2030, we have to start thinking not about how to fix a system of education, but how to grow a system of learning. It's changing the lens completely. We move from microspace and cyberspace out to blue space, which is putting back more than we took. So many new businesses, small and large, are starting around blue. Not just green, how to be green, but how to find ways to put back more than we took. One small entrepreneur that I met a few years ago buys up polluted, abandoned, industrialized urban properties that nobody wants and grows sunflower seeds. Winds up with huge fields of sunflower seeds that are beautiful. The fields raise the real estate prices of everything around them. He hires people to sell the sunflowers in the flower markets and also sells them for repurposing for biomass. Totally blue. What was there before was horrible. What is there now is absolutely beautiful. People who convert old industrial warehouses to artist cooperatives. The people who converted the West Side Highway in Manhattan to the High Line. These things are blue, and they are part of the engine for growth as we head into the future. And if we think about leveraging time, time has become the new luxury. Time is a proposition. Every one of our businesses have to think about how we use time more wisely how we benefit from it, how we charge for it, how we pay for it. Design is becoming a very important leverageable differentiator all across all industries. And storage space, biggest growing industry here in this country, fastest. We're running out of room for our personal junk. We're running out of room in our heads to store things. We're running out of room to store data. Companies like GE looking at holograms and three-dimensional ways, and people looking at DNA to store data. We need to figure out how to store electronic waste. Electronics is the biggest pollutive industry ever on the face of this planet, and every day we still throw away perfectly good telephones, perfectly good televisions, perfectly good refrigerators, so we have the next best, and we don't have room to store the stuff. So the industries and the businesses that figure this out, that figure out what to do with these electronics, how to separate them into the various parts that can be recycled in various ways, are going to make a lot of money. Play space. Play is becoming very important. We know that. It was always important for kids. We're learning it's important for adults. There's actually a museum of play in Rochester. The idea of converting play into a business, tremendous opportunities there. And then interspace, you hear a lot about the Internet of Things. We believe it's going to be the Internets of Things. But anytime you can figure out how to connect three things that weren't connected before, you have a whole new business. So I'm going to end this now with this comment. We are moving headlong into not only a new economy that we call the metaspace, and we're actually there, but because of Templosion, we're also coming up against another big wall. And that is that we're actually moving into a whole new higher level civilization. This is the first time ever in human history that we can do these three things: leave this planet, destroy this planet, and purposefully design the future of our evolution as a species, whether through robotics, sensors, artificial intelligence, the ability to print life. This is going in many directions at one time. Many, many directions. I'm not going to get into now the difference between morality and ethics, because they are two completely different things. We will never solve moral differences, ever. Morality is yours, it's mine. We can't convince each other of each other's morality, but we can come to the table and start thinking about the ethics of all of this and come to some bodies of understanding about what we might or might not do with all of these changes. That's a discussion for another day. As you think about doing these interviews for 2030, as you think about embarking on looking at the role that business can play in Oklahoma 2030, what I would challenge you is just this one simple thing. You may think you need to do a lot of fixes because there's overcapacity in a lot of industries and you need to compete against people that are out there doing innovative things. But I would argue that there has never been in any business or industry anything like overcapacity. All that we really have is under imagination. And if you can truly revision for the next 13 years, I think you can turn Oklahoma into something that is unique, that is very exciting, and that is not about trying to compete on what was, but is the ability to create what will be. So thank you for letting me run 5 minutes over, and I wish you well in everything you do. Whatever it takes, 'cause I love you.